GrAiNZ festivals that I've been to, everyone gets involved, so please at any point jump in, or if you want to come up and try, taste, feel, please do. It is really special to be here because, especially at GrAiNZ, I feel like a bit of an imposter syndrome. But when I started baking was at Movita Bakery with Michael James, who puts on GrAiNZ. But at the same time, I started here at the Gordon doing my patisserie course. So I came from a chef background, and I felt very much that I just knew recipes and I didn't really know what I was actually cooking, and decided that I wanted to venture into baking to get a better understanding of, eventually I wanted to run kitchens and I wanted to know what every section was doing. So I decided to join Michael at then Movita Bakery, which turned into Tivoli Road. And I started here doing my patisserie course with Brendan Hill, who's not here today. But those two guys have had a profound effect on, I guess, where I've gotten to today with my cooking, and especially with the Future Food System project, which is up here, which is what I'm going to talk a bit about at the start. And then I'm going to get to Nixtamalisation because I feel like they're really tied up. But I guess working with Michael, he really taught me a lot of skills about baking, actually cooking with bread, and then being here with Brendan, he was teaching me the skills of patisserie, and both very supportive people. Movita Bakery and Tivoli Road Bakery was the first kitchen that I ever worked in when I felt really safe. I felt like I could make mistakes, I wasn't going to get in trouble. I was being taught, and at the same time Brendan was doing the same thing here. And eventually when I did go to represent Australia for the World Championship of Pastry in Italy, I looked out and Brendan had actually travelled over to Italy to support the team. So two people who have massively, I guess, assisted to where I've gotten today. And it wasn't until I started writing Sustain, which comes out at the end of the year, that I realised how important baking was to the Future Food System project, which is really interesting because we weren't growing any wheat. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and Future Food System, and then we'll get to this. But when I was at the bakery, we were working with flour, and I don't know if Michael knows this, but I didn't even know what sourdough was. Kind of my first day, I didn't realise that we were growing a bacteria, that we were leavening bread with that bacteria, and I'd never shaped a loaf of bread. I'd never made a croissant, and he really started to show me those skills, and then eventually the recipe kind of ran out and we started having a few issues, and one day in particular we were shaping bread and it was kind of falling apart, and Michael goes, "Oh, the flour's too green." And I was like, what does that mean? And it kind of opened up another portal into what I guess baking was, and milling grain, and that it was an ingredient. It wasn't just a flour sitting on the shelf. So I kind of pictured someone going and kind of harvesting green grain, not realising that it was milled green, and that it would have an effect on our product when we were making bread. So I started to deep dive into, okay, well, what happens when you start aging wheat, or what happens when you mill it? And then it kind of went to, okay, what's happening when we're growing it and harvesting it, and what's going into the soil? And I probably didn't realise that until Future Food System, that this was the beginning of, I guess, the growing of the food and how important that was. And it was at a bakery and we were working with one ingredient. And I had been growing food at home in little milk crates, lined, kind of had just moved back from overseas. So we'd always been growing food, but wasn't really in touch. And it was a very clarifying moment that I wanted to be in touch with where food was coming from. So I worked at the bakery for about 3 years. Then I went and worked with another pastry chef, Sean Quaid. And then I met Joost and Matt Stone. And at the time it was with the greenhouse projects. So greenhouse were restaurants where zero waste concept, collecting local food. And I went and started working with Joost at Greenhouse and at Brothel, which was a zero waste bone broth restaurant. And that was really cemented that this is what I want to be doing. I couldn't bake anymore. I don't know how you guys get up that early. Just not for me. but I still really have that passion for the skill of baking. So I started working with Yoast and we started milling grain, and I felt inside really good about what I was doing. I felt like I wasn't having a massive impact on the earth. The food was really nourishing, it was delicious, people were really into it. And then we started at Oak Ridge, where we started growing food on a larger scale for the restaurant. And I guess Yoast in the background had kept saying, hey, how would you feel about this house? You know, trying to, exactly what Matthew was just saying about connecting people to soil and to food, like where that's coming from through a dish and through a plate of food. Kind of getting people to connect with the environment through food. And I was like, well, it makes complete sense because we all eat. It's something that we all have in common, and it's food, and it can be that simple. I mean, Matthew has a lot of facts. I don't have that many facts, but I really love food, and I really care about the environment. So he kept dropping these hints about, hey, let's grow, like, live in this house for a year, we'll document it, let's see how much food we can grow in one particular house, and see if it will work. Can a family sustain itself from its inhabitants, from its dwelling? And this was Future Food System. So in Federation Square, not where it was meant to be at the start, when Yoast started convincing us it was out in the Dandenong Ranges, and I was cool with that. And then it got dropped in at Federation Square, and it all kind of coincided with the start of COVID. So this is probably 2018, 2019. This is the house that has, it's probably the 5th iteration of the greenhouse projects. So it follows the same principles: zero waste, doesn't penetrate the ground, is reverse engineered, but it's a step further. So growing all its food. And I'm gonna run through some of the elements of what the house was. So there's Yoast, Matt, and myself. And this was our mission statement, and something that we referred back to the whole time throughout the project. So the idea of the house was to mimic nature, but for me, I guess it was always about connecting people with food, and that's all I know. I'm not a builder. I know a little bit about sustainability, but the same as what everyone else reads about. And I was more interested in about growing food, if it was going to be possible, because we didn't know, and about cooking. These are some of the, to mimic nature, it has to be closed loop. In nature, there is no waste. So every element from the house went back into mimicking the house, but it couldn't happen without inhabitants. So it's just the same as now. We help feed the environment. So it got shipped in. This was also to address some housing issues that we're having with rural housing, affordability. So they're modules. They're stainless steel modules, they're not shipping containers. So each module got shipped in, it's sitting on planks of wood, which was very scary because I remember when the build happened and these big semi-trailers were coming in. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe one big plank of wood, but they were literally just little planks of wood stacked up like Jenga. And then they got shipped in. This is also any configuration. So this was just the shape that we had, and it sat on an 87 square metre footprint. It was surrounded by solar panels. We collected our water in a stainless steel tank. We had a biodigester, so all our organic waste and compost went into the biodigester, produced methane, we cooked on the gas that it produced. And it was also kind of surrounded by Form Flow, which is an invention from Geelong, which is a corrugated iron which they designed off the McDonald's apple pie container, and it can be folded. So instead of corrugated iron just meeting and there's an airlock, it's actually folded around the corner, which helps with kind of insects, but also is a fire resistant. So in a bushfire situation, usually the kind of embers in a tap fire would go for the opening. So a big part of it was designed around bushfire being in Australia and with the evolving climate situation. The other component against bushfire defence was Stramit or Durapanel, which is straw. So barley, wheat, rice, they cut down the straw and then it goes through, I've got a picture of it actually, I'll show you when it comes to it, but you harvest the straw and it gets popped through a machine which compresses it, and as it gets compressed it heats and releases an enzyme and gets connected together. That's what the walls were made out of. So it usually happens with acoustics in kind of buildings with music, but we used it in the house. That meant that we didn't need to put insulation in either, and that it could breathe. So all the walls were filled with biochar as well, kind of taking any toxins out of the house. The whole idea being that it was like walking through a rainforest, so there's no chemicals, no glues, no epoxies, all kind of certified. We could have got the house certified organic. We also used up a lot of waste materials, so in the centre you can see the floor. So the tiles were made out of recycled concrete, sand, and then in between the grout were copper wires, so it was actually earthed. So if you take your shoes off, you're actually connected to the earth's earthing qualities. We grew at times, 50 to 60 species of plants and animals. So this was probably our major source of protein, which were our mushroom. So in the centre, that mushroom, all the steam and fresh air was funneled off from our bathroom into the mushroom, which we're growing on waste. So straw, spent coffee, and they were inoculated. They take about 2 weeks to start to flower, and then we would grow mushrooms. So we grew 46 types of mushrooms throughout the 12 months, just due to temperature changes, which was a massive learning curve. Trying to grow oyster mushrooms in summer with a kind of plastic frontage is really difficult. And we worked with John Ford from Unearthed Mushrooms to grow. This was probably my favourite part of the house. We had aquaponics. So on your left, I think it is, the Stramit, so that's the straw Dura panel. We painted that with a lime wash and calcium wash so that they could still breathe. So there were no toxic chemicals in the house, which is really important. In the centre are our yabbies, and then on the other side are our barramundi. So we had aquaponics. So aquaponics systems are a fish tank on the bottom, and then a grow bed on the top where you grow shallow rooted vegetables. The idea is that the fish waste gets pumped onto the grow bed. The plants in the grow bed take those nutrients, and then anything drops back down for the fish to feed. So a closed loop system. We probably used our aquaponics systems more for the rapid growth of our vegetables. We grew a lot of watercress, which is one of the most nutrient dense vegetables, but we did harvest fish as well. We grew trout. We had crickets. They were more for vitamin K2, so we didn't have a cow, we didn't have any sugarcane, and we weren't growing wheat. So some of the ingredients that you would automatically go to, or I would go to in my fallback recipes, we couldn't do anymore. So beef, they eat vitamin K2, they get that from the grass. We didn't have that, so we were using crickets, and they were eating all our leafy greens. So that was a source of protein for us and nutrients. And this was the kitchen in the middle. So if you look out of Federation Square, you could look into the kitchen. And then we had our 2 chickens, Maggie and Stephanie, and they were used for eggs. We didn't eat chickens. And then we grew a variety of grains. We had chickpeas. Our 2 most productive crops were buckwheat and sorghum, hence why I get to the sorghum tostada. In our first probably 3 months, we grew 40 kilos of pumpkin, about 8 kilos of green beans, and 4 kilos of chickpeas, which is really cool. And these were some of the dishes that we would produce. The idea being that we wanted to show that growing your own food is more than just a salad, that you could really push the boundaries and connect with people and show that growing your food is delicious. And I guess my biggest learning from the house was skills, and that's why the tostada comes into play. When we were at Oak Ridge, we were growing painted mountain corn and growing heaps of food. We had a local dairy, we were having amazing access to produce. And I remember one day Ben Shu came for lunch, and I showed him the corn. And he said, he goes, "Oh, what are you going to do with it?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to make tacos and tostadas." And he said, "Oh, and you'll nixtamalize it?" And I was like, "I don't know what that means." And we started to mill it, and I tried to make what are they called? tostadas, but the round ones are soft ones, like a soft shell type of tortilla. And I couldn't. Again, went into a deep dive about nixtamalisation and realised that history usually always has the answers. Something that we had to refer back to a lot in at Future Food System was historic methods of cookery, and I referred a lot back to the bakery, even though we didn't have wheat. But the effects of what salt might have on an ingredient, the effects that fermenting has on an ingredient, and really honing in on what one specific ingredient can do. Say carrot, what happens when you ferment it or bury it in soil or add salt or submerge it into honey, different flavour profiles. And there's probably one day in particular I remember having a meltdown because we didn't have sugar and we had lemons, and that was about it. I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with honey and lemons that aren't, that's exciting. And it was around the same time that we decided, because we were in the middle of Fed Square, that we would open up to the public, which was something that we had never set out to do. We decided to start doing 14-seater dinners, and people were paying, and the pressure was really on to produce. And it was our time to really show that this kind of living, this type of cooking is something that is delicious and that everybody can do. So that pressure, I guess I started to research even more, and really it clarified that I had spent the previous years, even here, just being a chef, I had been collecting a lot of skills, and finally, when I had all these restrictions, that I could put those skills to the test, and we started to produce some really cool dishes. And as I mentioned before, so buckwheat and sorghum were kind of ingredients that were really productive. The time that we were there, buckwheat floured 6 times in 1 year. I really had struggled with the bread side of things, but then we started making sausages. So it was really cool kind of seeing the different ways. So when I remembered about Ben coming to Oak Ridge and talking about nixtamalisation, I thought maybe we could do that with sorghum. And we did, and it worked. And I still use it on my menus now at Little Picket and Lawn. So I don't know if everyone knows what sorghum is. I guess it's a grain. We're at GrAiNZ. So I did a bit of research about sorghum, but it's pretty hazy about where it all kind of nixtamalisation started. But they say because you add a pickling salt or lime wash or calcium hydroxide, I thought, how would someone back in history get their hands on calcium hydroxide like I can? I can just Google it on the internet. But the first kind of historic events of nixtamalisation happened through boiling grain, mostly corn. So traditionally, nixtamalisation happens with corn or masa, and they boiled it in lime rocks. And over time, there was a few reasons for it. One, to make nutrients more available. So when I guess the process of nixtamalisation, there's a few reasons. So you turn a grain into a dough to make it more pliable, makes nutrients more available to your gut, especially niacin, turns it into vitamin B3, which is really, really important if you have restricted amount of nutrients in your diet. It also, I guess, is delicious. So that flavour that you get when you go to Mexico or you're in America and you have that, I can only describe it as Mexican flavour, comes from that process of nixtamalisation. So the calcium hydroxide turns into an alkaline solution, and it starts to break down the cell of the husk on the outer edge. As that breaks down, it makes the centre hull more it's able to absorb. It turns it into oils, and they're able to connect with protein, which is why you're able to work it as a dough. The process is very simple, and there's 2 ways to do it. So I'm doing it the most simple way because you can replicate this very easily in a restaurant. There was 2 ways we were doing it at Future Food System, this way, when we started to cook for people. But originally, to make that alkaline solution, you can actually boil ash. So you can create a fire of certain plants, take the ash out of the fire, boil it in water, let it sit overnight. The water turns alkaline, everything drops to the bottom. take that water off. Cook the grain in the alkaline solution. Again, let that sit overnight. Then the next day, wash the husk off. This is the process we're going to do now. You wash that outer cell off, and then you have masa. So we're going to speed that process up. So I have 250 grams of sorghum. You can? This way?
Oh, that's that one. Yeah. Thank you.
That's all right. The only spoon I have is this. So 250 grams of sorghum, and then I have 750 grams of water. So you can pour a little bit in here, and then the rest on top of the sorghum. Take 1 teaspoon of cal. So you can get calcium hydroxide. I get it from Artisan Potato, and that's in Melbourne, and they have a website. So you can just Google it and order it and send it to you.
Calcium hydroxide.
It's alkaline, so kind of like caustic soda on a very low level. So don't ingest it. Just give you a little warning. Take 1 teaspoon, mix it into some water. This is just to help with distributing it through. Otherwise, it clumps a little bit. Pour it in. And then you're just cooking sorghum. So we're going to put it on like a low simmer. It takes a long time, so I have one I prepared earlier. Well, it takes about 35 minutes, 40 minutes. And you're going to simmer it. This is the only tricky part. If you boil it too rapidly, your grain isn't going to be cooked. If you go too slow, you don't evaporate enough water. So you're just cooking it at a moderate simmer until you can pick up a grain and you squash it between your fingers and you see one small white dot in the center. The outer, it's all cooked, but you need that one little dot because you kind of want it a little bit undercooked just to help with the rolling of it. If you want to make like a softer, what's it called again? Tortilla. I've just been doing tostadas, so I always forget about tortillas. If you want them to be a bit softer, I recommend soaking the grain for 1 hour before you go to cook it. The soaking just allows this cooking process to add a bit more water. You don't want to mess with this quantity because the calcium hydroxide to the water ratio is correct. But by soaking it, straining it, and then putting it in, the grain's just that slightly bit softer. And then you grill it and you have a nice, flexible tortilla. I'm never going to get it today. You boil that, then the water, like absorption method of rice, take it off, put the lid on, and that's it. Just let it sit overnight. And then the best part is when you wake up the next morning and then you open it up. It just has the best smell, and I feel like everyone should smell this. But I'm walking around. Because this is that Mexican smell that I was talking about. I don't know
Joe, do you soak the sorghum in hot or cold water?
Just cold water. Yep. What I'm going to do, I might take a little bit and then we can pass it around.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll keep going. I don't know if anyone knows what that smell is.
Yeah.
What the actual name of it is.
It smells like masa.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what the chemical actual.
I don't know the chemical either, but if you smell masa, that's what it smells like.
Yeah, it's the best smell and the best flavour. So I'm going to take a portion of this. I'll give it a stir so you can see what underneath looks like. So you can see the white around the edges. That's because it's alkaline, so it is corrosive. Like, you just want to be a bit careful. Take the sorghum once it's at this point, and I didn't realise the sink was here, so I'm just going to show you at this point. But I do this under running water and in a sieve because you start rinsing it and you'll see it all starts to run off. So you're going to wash it under running water and you kind of scrape it against the sieve. It really helps to get that outer layer off. It's quite a nice, I like doing this part as well. And you see this one's from Mount Zero, so we GrAiNZ sorghum. So I think it's something like 33 or 40% of sorghum is grown in Africa, in Nigeria, but we do have, it's native to Australia as well, so it's a native Australian grain. A lot of it's used for animal feed and fodder. I think there's probably about 24 varieties of sorghum, but this is the best one to eat. It's also used as a cover crop. It's kind of the main reason that we had it at the house was as a cover crop. But it's also really delicious. You can pop it like popcorn in hot water. So you want to wash it under running water continuously. Then you get to this point where it's nice and soft. So is it called hominy? When you hominy. Sorry. Where you just get the actual grain. So with corn, what do you use it for? Just kind of.
So like you can eat the grains like hominy, like corn, in with a dish called tostada, which is just whole. Or yeah, when you grind it in the blender, that's the grain pasta.
Pasta, yeah.
I guess what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so I'm going to build this, and then you could make tamales with masa, where you flavour the masa and you steam it. Usually in banana leaves or.
Yeah, banana or something, where the part of it.
Yeah, so you can flavour that. I really like this process because in a restaurant, crunchy things are really nice. Crunchy things to start off a dish that aren't a seed cracker, a yesterday's bread cracker, which we demoed last time at GrAiNZ. But I really like this as well because it's gluten-free. Gluten-free. I take now the Nixtamalisation sorghum, and then I'm not going to be able to show you this bit. I guess you could use a hand-cranked mill, so you pop it in, mill it up, but I just use a blender. And I probably add just a small pinch of salt. I'm not sure if this does anything, and I know that it probably does. After being a baker, salt does something. But I like to think that it also seasons the cracker a little bit. And then I'm just going to blend it into a dough.
Joe, did you try that in a water vessel at all?
I haven't. Yeah, only because there was a bit of time pressure.
Yeah.
But I know it would work. I'd probably maybe make sure, try doing the soaking method at the start if you're going to do that, just so it's easier and a lot quicker. Depending on how you kind of want your tostada, like if you want it really dense and crunchy, that's when you want to leave it a little bit undercooked in the center. But if you want it really soft and kind of short texture, you want it to be really, really cooked. And then it starts to stick to the sides because it's started to heat up. I don't know if anyone wants to come and feel how warm it is. And then it starts to stick. And it smells really nice. Washing hair. Washing hair, yeah. I don't know what kind of water I have. It's like my mum would say that. I'm just going to blend it a little bit more because I would like this one to be a bit finer.
Have you played around with making like sorghum tamales or other traditional foods like that?
Not really. I'd love to put smoked fish through it and steam that, and then probably put it through, like, fold it in a cabbage leaf. I've been thinking about doing that, but I guess with Future Food System it became a bit of a battle between time and experimenting. Like we had, once at the start we had heaps of time, and then during lockdown we had heaps of time, and then once we kind of were serving people, not as much. I guess now with Little Picket I'd like to start doing some stuff like that. I tried nixtamalising chickpeas and it didn't work. I don't know why I thought that might work.
Have you tried other grains other than buckwheat? Have you tried other grains?
No, only the chickpea, but it just didn't. Like, you could get it into a dough, and then you'd roll it out, and then you go to fry it and just like that, and it tasted like shit. I don't think there's a picture up there. So that, see the one in the, it's my bottom left-hand corner. I don't know if that's your bottom left-hand corner.
Yeah, it is.
That's a buckwheat sausage that we would make, and kind of following this similar idea of kind of using ingredients like we took linseeds, and you blend linseed with a bit of water and make a bit of a mayonnaise, and then you cook buckwheat, same as rice with an absorption method. So 500 grams of buckwheat, 750 grams of water. This is the best way to cook buckwheat. Bring it up to like a simmer, and then half cover it. 15-minute timer. Take it off, and it's perfectly cooked. And then you fold the linseed through the buckwheat, and then we would put in like some little tofu that we'd make and some onions and stuff, and you roll it and steam it, and it's the best sausage, like a vegan sausage. So we're actually putting that on the menu this week at Little Pickett, if you want to come.
Are you finding
I haven't tried it with millet actually.
that looks like one.
I think that would, it could work. So then I just roll it. How warm is it?
Yeah, like how important is that?
I find it's just because it's easy to use. So you could probably get, you can make this even smoother. Yeah. So you could just get it a bit smoother, and then it's really easy to work with. It really depends on the kind of the texture you want. I always find the textures I want are the hardest to work with. So I like it a bit crunchy, and I like it really short, which means this is going to be really short and crunchy and tends to fall apart a little bit. But then if you want it really smooth, it tends to be a little bit denser and a little bit like firmer on your tooth. And then we roll it out. I'm lucky enough we've got a dough break at work, so we just stick it through the dough break. And then you could, your thickness is kind of, I guess, how you want it. I find about a mil and a half to 2 mil is nice. Oh, can't see that. Is that better? Then you can just roll it out. And then super hot oil. And then you just fry it. This one's super short. I could probably blend it for a tiny bit longer. But I'm just going to fry pieces.
Can I have some?
Pardon? I've never tried. Can you bake it? Have you ever baked it?
I'm sure, but I think my experience is that makes it super hard and like crunchy, not in a good way.
Yeah, I feel like you're taking the moisture out of it. So if anyone would like to try it, yeah, you just grill it. Yeah, but I would recommend adding a little bit more liquid. So these ones are a bit, so they were cooked yesterday. When you take a lot of the moisture out, they last in an airtight container, and then I season. How are we going with time? Does anyone want to come and wash some, blend some, and cook some, or roll some? It's GrAiNZ. Or does anyone have any questions about future food system or?
Well, what is the future for you in the future food system right now? What's your next project?
So Dave, my partner and I have just opened Little Picket, a restaurant at Lawn Bowls Club in Lawn. And I guess following on from the future food system, I definitely questioned like restaurants a lot, and it was a hard situation because I always wanted to be a chef. I love cooking, but I really question what our role is in the environment because kitchens are damaging. But we also have this potential to, I guess, rewrite the future a little bit where we're heading, and Little Picket is, I guess, the answer to that. I didn't set out to open a restaurant, but then we have. So I'm trying to be as conscious as I can to. The biggest learning I took away from that, other than the skill thing, was that we can really just affect our local communities. That is how, if everyone just started to affect the people around them, that's going to trickle on and all meld together, and we can actually make some massive change. And Little Picket is just the answer to that. So we co-farm at a place called Bell's Harvest in Janjup, where we plant and grow. So on a Wednesday in the garden, and either Wednesday afternoon or Thursday morning we harvest the food for the menu. We work with other local growers like Kinsfolk in Moriac, and then other protein producers. And we just write our menu each week, and the goal of that was that we weren't rebuilding a building, we were using something existing. There was a community there that wanted to be fed and they wanted a place to hang out. I wanted to cook, so I wanted to create a job that I really wanted, which was growing food and cooking with seasonal produce. And I wanted it to be skillful. So things like baking or nixtamalising or making puff pastry, cheese, charcuterie. We write the menu every week, so I can do whatever I want, which is awesome. And that's what the goal with Little Picket is. And it's kind of working. Like, there's a really nice community there. We're having a really big impact with all the local growers. And it's a lot of work. It's not as easy as just ringing up and ordering food and it just shows up. We go around, pick up all the produce. We use local wine producers, but at the end of the day, I might feel a bit tired, but I feel really happy inside that I'm doing a good thing. And I think that's where the future of food is, and what a chef's role is. Like, we're meant to cook with seasonal produce. And that's our major job. It's not the rest of the stuff that happens.
How do you educate the customers on the work that's involved in getting your produce to the table, the cost that it ends up being to them, without having to preach to them and lecture and
well, I guess it was a decision that I just wanted to feel good about what I'm doing. Yeah. So we don't probably tell people really.
Yeah. And
I think
they're happy. See, I mean, you have a name that goes with your restaurant already. So like, how can other people do that?
Well, I think food tastes better when you cook like that. So it ends up kind of speaking for itself. Like, the people in London know, like our demographic, older kind of baby boomers, and they didn't know what the future food system was. And I don't think they really cared. But I think they liked that the food tastes good. And now we're getting people, like the first, I guess, 4 months, we opened in August. We didn't buy a lemon. Like, we just had people dropping them off. So I think it's more just providing a community, and that's where you have the biggest impact.
Talking about education, I really loved your having go with productions. They were beautiful to look at, they were obviously informative. And there wasn't a lot of storytelling behind it. Can you talk a bit about how you came up with that idea, what the process was like, and how it was received?
Yeah, so Have a Go series was at a time where I wanted to write a cookbook, but I guess my cooking is kind of like skill-based technical cooking. But I also see food as quite an artistic thing. And I got trapped in this world of not knowing cookbook that looked really beautiful or something really functional for people to use. And then Have a Go, which my mum came up with the name for, was the answer to that. So finding beauty in the process, which is again something that I learned from baking, was the time spent doing one thing, and you really have to pay attention to the air bubbles, the changes in textures, and Have a Go, I wanted to capture all of those processes, but I also know the feeling of when you're trying to learn a new skill and it's extremely overwhelming and you go on the internet and you don't even know where to start. So I wanted to give people a place to start where they would at least get a result, and then they could go back and they could see their part where they may have gone wrong or they wanted to find out more information about, and there would be terminology, and then they could go and look up that specific thing. So I guess I just have chosen things that I like: cheese making, bread making, croissants, charcuterie, and then we have a few others that just got to get around to publishing. We've shot them all. We've done sponge cake, sausages, hot cross buns, and then where is it? Being a baker, I started. I've got a beautiful knife because I'm a chef, but then bakers end up using these things every day and all day, but they might be crappily made and they're $6 and no one really cares. So then we decided to take Have a Go into tools, so started making reclaimed wooden rolling pins, and then developed this dough knife, which I thought was going to be really simple. And I rang my friend MD Knives and I was like, let's make a dough knife. There's no Australian made ones, and then realised that forging steel at 2 mil or 1 mil thick is really difficult, and it took us a year to develop. And then the handle, I was working during lockdown, I worked at Felco for about 12 months, and it was a really good refresher into what does it feel like to hold this, and the functionality of it. So then we developed the dough knife through Have a Go series. So just trying to really focus on artisan skills and the beauty in the process. So yeah, we sell these if anyone wants one.
Yes.
Go to MD Knives.
Those tostadas are amazing.
Thank you.
They're so really delicious. I have a question about fat. So when you work in the house, you mentioned salt, which presumably you're producing, and you need fat for this. So what was the ethos?
Well, so we were using grapeseed oil, but obviously you could grow grapes. So some of the components of the house we were there for 12 months, so we would get our one season, but the idea of the house would be that part of it would be covered in grape vines, and that you could take those grape seeds, or you could grow olive trees on your property and have olive oil. So anything that you could potentially grow over a long, expansive time, we were allowed to use. We put restrictions on ourselves, but we used that. So salt, we had two options: go and collect salt from the salt lakes or dry salt water. And then things like with the aquaponics system, we had to make our fish feed, which was a massive hurdle. And then you start deep diving into farmed fish and what they're being fed, and then it's even worse because it's all the wild fish going into that. So we started growing spirulina and algae for omega-3s, and then one of the best things, which is I wasn't sure what to do for this demo, but was tiger nuts, which was a tuber that we were growing. I'm sure you've heard us talk about a lot about tiger nuts. It's a little tuber that is in same as the potato, but it's nut sledge, or it's a grass. So it grows everywhere here, and it's actually a weed. Can't take it into WA, but it looks the size of a hazelnut, and that was the answer to sugar. Better than honey, because honey, I love honey, but it has such a distinct flavour. But then we were taking tiger nuts, you just wash them and dry them overnight, and then you mill it, and it's like a potato. It has all the starch, like a potato flour that would come out, but it is so sweet. So if you make tiger nut milk, like you would make almond milk, you take that starchy water and you cook it, and it thickens like a custard. So we started thickening that, added a little bit of macadamia And that was our ice cream base. We didn't have to add any sugar because the tiger nut was sweet enough. And then we would mill it into like an almond meal and then mix it. Like, this is the coolest thing about cooking like that, because you can take an egg and then you go, what is the best quality of an egg yolk? And it's like fat, it emulsifies. And then what is the best quality of an egg white? We can add air, you know, whip it up, it adds protein, it adds chew and stretch. Then you mix them back together with a bit of the oil and maybe a bit of honey, and then you fold in those tiger nuts, and then we produced a cake. And it was just the simplest ingredients, but utilising their best quality, which is like the coolest thing about food. And the same as, you know, this, just taking the best quality of that ingredient. Yeah, the tiger nuts were a really interesting ingredient.
With the leftover water with the calcium in it, could you use that as fertiliser or
It is alkaline, so you'd have to test your soil first. So
what were you using in the house? What were you doing with that water?
just wastewater. So I guess when it mixes into the stream, it's not going to be damaging. But I just question putting it on your plants, because you'll throw out your pH in your soil. Be alright if you had a super acidic soil and you needed to bring it down a little bit. That would work.
Just coming off the back of Matthew's talk, where it was really a focus on like nutrient density coming from the soil, could you talk a little bit about like the growing methods you're using in the urban environment, and you know, having had to spend time away from the fields? What does the future of food look like? Is it an integration of these methods from the industry?
Yeah, it was super interesting because we had a lot of people coming through wanting to grow food, and you know, might have not enough sunlight or not enough area to actually grow. So having kind of ideas and methods for every type of living condition was really cool. We had, I think it's about 10 ingredients in our soil, and if you go to Future Food System Instagram, there's all these little highlights. You can click on one that says soil and it breaks down everything that's in it. So we started doing a few tests from the moment we started growing on nutritional density of our food. As soon as waste goes back into it, it increases in nutrients. I believe that had we kept going, we would have seen bigger spikes in that. And it's just because of nature. So we would put things like, it's just, in Matthew's talk he actually talks about it, especially with cattle farming, that there's a microorganism in their manure that can sequester carbon when the soil is in balance. So it's all about balance. So we would have compost, mycelium compost, silica, magnesium, shell grit, tan bark, biochar. Can't remember, it was a recipe of soil. And the food just tastes a lot better. And I think that's part of what we do at Little Picket when you grow food, compared to every now and then we'll buy stuff in, because it is really hard to grow 100% for a restaurant. And the stuff that you might get in, you know, we grew onions, so we dried all our onions and used it, and then we buy same onions, and the difference is just like, you cannot almost compare it. So I think being really cautious of what goes into soil is really going to, you'll see it on the other side, just with flavour in general.
So it was only like raised beds with soil that you were using, or like hydroponics?
We had the aquaponics system, but we were taking the nutrients from that. We didn't do any hydroponic growing, but that was probably a major part. The building was weighted down by the garden, so it had an engineering quality as well. And I always questioned about, because I'm really interested in no-till farming, what does it mean when you plant something in a box, and then how does the mycelium grow? You know, but we were adding mycelium compost to it as well. I think there's really massive benefits to growing at home, but the key is adding compost and biochar. Yeah.
And were you using like the same rotation mentality in those beds as you would in the field?
Yeah, it was continuous.
Yeah.
So that was probably a big part of the house, was if we stopped planting, not only would we run out of food, but the problems or the input of energy became bigger, so you kind of had to constantly plant and harvest. Otherwise, you know, if you walk past the aquaponics system, for example, you notice one of the filters is getting a bit yucky, or something's not right, and you're like, I'll do that tomorrow, and then you come back and the whole thing is ruined, and then you have to spend a whole day doing it. So that, I think, kind of maintaining constant growing and harvesting, which is what we do with our garden now, is really the only way to kind of live a life like that. You kind of have to integrate it into everyday living. You can't just kind of go, I'll spend half a week, next week I'll do a bit more. Yeah, you just can't keep on top of the weeds and stuff like that.
Did you have an issue with pests?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we had grubs for sure at the start on cabbages, but we worked out really well. We had the chicken, but then we'd also, it sounds silly because you're never going to do this, but we did. But we would pick them and then feed them to the yabbies, so they became a food source. Yeah, which was awesome because at the start we were trying to figure that process out, like taking worms as well. But there's some natural ways to do it, like milk and chili, or not at the house, but we didn't have too many problems. We had one possum that used to hang around a fair bit. But because we had the chickens there, they probably became the biggest issue with digging stuff up.
I'm very curious about like a kind of day in the life from when you wake up when you go to sleep, like maintaining this system. You know, what is it like when you wake up? Do you have like a system that you'd go through, like checking things and do some, you know, works of cooking, or what does that look like?
At the house?
Yeah.
I guess you're living in it, so you notice. At the start, you didn't know what you're looking for, so things were just going wrong. But then when you're in it all the time, you could hear a fan that wasn't working right, or the smells would change, and you're like, what is that? So when we first opened, we were on solar power, and then we had nickel-ion batteries. So a nickel-ion battery works very similar to a car, so you have to like turn it on and use it, and if you don't, they drop their charge. And we put I was really lucky, I got to be a part of the construction of the house. So we put the battery wall in, and we were building, but we were using power from Fed Square. So the batteries were sitting there, and we turned a couple of lights on, and that's about it. And then we went to open in December and move in, and you'd get through the day because we had the sun, and as soon as the sun would disappear, we'd have no power. So you'd go to start cooking dinner, and then everything was out. Then it started to become a real issue because the water pumps for the aquaponics stopped working, and then fish started to die. And then when they would die, you throw out the balance of the pH, and then the plant started to die. And then you're like, this is going to be a whole day, and tomorrow night's going to happen again. So we had to replace the nickel-ion batteries because we hadn't used them enough with a Australian-made lithium battery. And then probably 2 months after we did that, one day we were like, what is that smell? Like, it was disgusting. So we had a Sani pack, so any waste from the toilet would go through this machine, kind of chew it up, and then it would go into the biodigester, start to ferment, and then turn into methane, and then back into gas onto an open flame. So I had done a lot of painting, fixing, and Matt was there, and I was like, this is your turn. Like, I am not dealing with that smell. And a friend was down from Byron Bay doing a print of one of our fish, and we were sitting upstairs, and Matt went down and we were printing this fish, and Matt came up and he was head to toe covered in feces. And I was like, what had happened with the stop-starting of the power, the teeth that would chew everything up had just like backed up, and then he was on FaceTime with Yoast and pressed a button to release it, and it just exploded. And then there was raw sewage going down Federation Square, which isn't in the documentary. But things like that started happening. So you just notice it, and after that experience, we were on top of everything. Never let anything kind of get away from you. So it would be walk past the mushrooms, check the mushrooms, make sure the bees are still happening, what needs harvesting. And after a while, because you spend so much time in a garden, and it happens now, you kind of foresee, I'm going to pick that next week. That weed's going to get out of control if we don't deal with it now. you just take your place in nature, really. I got to wrap up, but if there's any other questions.
Did Matt need a new phone after the...
Well, the funny thing was, he went down and he pressed it again. Anyway, thank you. And I know I don't want to sound too preachy, but it was this whole thing and what we're doing at Little Picket and Future Food System, it made me realise that even as an individual, you can really make a massive difference by, if you grow food and then you learn the skill of fermenting it and you start building up a pantry, you start bringing waste into your house, you start cooking really delicious food, it's really good for your body, you feel good, you start sharing that with people, you can have a massive impact on your community just by doing a very simple thing of cooking. You don't even have to grow the food, you might go to a farmer's market to take it, but just cooking seasonal food is a really powerful act, and I feel it's very exciting to be a chef now, even with all doom and gloom, but yeah, we can definitely, as cooks and bakers and cooking at home, you can take a place in the ecosystem. Yeah.